She is on her knees in the square, her wrists in iron, the executioner's shadow falling across her face. The crowd calls her a thief. The decree calls her a traitor. The baby in the soldier's arms is screaming for her, and every person watching believes that child was stolen. She could speak. She could tell them exactly whose baby this is, exactly what she found, exactly who ordered that infant dead before she drew her second breath. She doesn't. Because the man who signed her death warrant is standing 3 feet behind the king, and he is smiling. 4 months ago, she was nobody. Then she found what someone powerful needed buried, and ran. Chapter 1. The Theft That Wasn't. The night Ella Green became a wanted criminal, she was not doing anything heroic. She was lost. The east corridor of the Vel Duran Palace servants' quarters had 17 doors that looked identical in torchlight, and she had counted the wrong ones coming back from the apothecary. She was a healer's assistant, junior, invisible, the kind of person guards looked through rather than at, and she carried a satchel of fever herbs for old Pauline, the head laundress who had been sick 3 days running. She took the wrong turn at the third arch. She knew it the moment she smelled it. Not herbs, not torch smoke, something iron-rich and final. Blood. Ella stopped walking. The sensible thing, the safe thing, was to turn around, find the correct corridor, deliver the herbs, and forget the smell entirely. She was 23 years old and had survived 4 years in this palace by being precisely the kind of person who turned around. She took 1 step back. Then she heard it. Not a cry, something smaller than a cry, a sound so thin and so furious it barely qualified as sound at all, the noise of something that had not yet learned the world could ignore it and was therefore refusing to be ignored. Her body moved before the argument finished. The door at the end of the corridor was not fully closed. She pushed it open with 2 fingers and stood in the frame and took in what was in front of her in pieces because the whole of it was too large to absorb at once. A woman on the floor. Fine dress, wrong for a servant. Dark hair spread wide. Her hands. Ella's eyes went to the hands, frozen into the particular clutch of someone who had held on to something with everything they had and been made to let go. A second woman near the window, older, a midwife's satchel overturned beside her, also still. And in the corner, wedged between the overturned washstand and the cold stone wall, wrapped in cloth so fine it caught the torchlight like water, a bundle. A living bundle. Ella crossed the room. She crouched. She pulled back the cloth with hands that had stopped shaking through sheer determination, and found a face so new it still looked like it was deciding whether the world was worth the trouble. A baby girl, days old, fists clenched, eyes screwed shut, mouth wide open, producing the sound that had reached her in the corridor. Ella looked at the cloth she was wrapped in. Then she stopped breathing. Embroidered at the corner, a seal she had seen on official documents, on the doors of the upper court, on the ring of the man whose portrait hung in every room of this palace, the royal seal of King Aldrich Vane. The baby opened her eyes. Dark, unfocused, newborn eyes that saw nothing clearly and still somehow seemed to find her face. Ella sat back on her heels and thought very fast. The queen had been announced dead in childbirth 6 days ago. The child with her, they said. The whole palace had been in mourning black since. She had helped Pauline press the mourning linens herself. The queen was on the floor in front of her. The child, apparently, had not read the announcement. Put her down. The sensible part of her said, "You are a healer's assistant. This is not your corridor. This is not your door. Whatever happened here, the people who did it are still in this palace tonight." The baby's fist escaped the wrapping. 5 fingers, each one impossibly small, spread open in the cold air and closed around nothing and opened again, reaching, insisting, furious at the empty air for not providing. Ella held out her finger. The fist closed around it with a grip that had no business being that strong. She heard boots in the corridor. More than 1 pair. Moving fast. She did not think. She pulled the baby against her chest, tucked the fine cloth inside her plain satchel over the fever herbs, stood up and went to the window. Second floor, stone courtyard below. A hay cart, mercifully, still parked against the kitchen wall. The boots were at the door. She went out the window. She hit the hay cart hard enough to knock the breath from her body, rolled, landed on her hands and knees in the courtyard, and was moving before the pain fully registered. The baby had not made a sound during the fall. When Ella checked her, pressing her hand to the small chest, she found her breathing and apparently unimpressed, her expression suggesting she'd had worse evenings. Ella pulled her tighter and walked, not ran. Walking servants were invisible, running servants were suspects, toward the eastern gate. She heard the shout from the second-floor window when she was 20 feet from the gate. "There! The girl with the satchel!" She ran. The gate guard was slow. She was faster, and she knew the drainage channel that ran under the eastern wall, had known it for 4 years of pre-dawn herb collecting, and she went through it on her hands and knees in the dark, with the baby tucked against her chest, and came up on the other side in the outer city, gasping, filthy, free. She stopped in a doorway 3 streets away and checked the baby again. Still breathing, still present, now awake and regarding her with the focused intensity of someone filing information away. Ella looked back at her. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said quietly. The baby blinked. "I know whose you are." She pressed her back against the cold stone. "And I know you were supposed to be dead, which means someone in that palace." She stopped, reorganized. "Someone needs you to stay dead." She reached into the satchel and moved the cloth aside carefully. The seal again, and underneath it, pressed flat against the baby's side, she hadn't noticed in the room, a small sealed letter. Wax stamped with a different mark, not the royal seal, a private one. She didn't open it, not here, not in a doorway with boots still echoing 3 streets over. She tucked it back. The baby made a sound, not distress, something else. The sound of someone noticing warmth and deciding provisionally that the situation had potential. "All right," Ella said. She did not have a plan. She had a backstreet knowledge of this city, 4 years of being invisible, and a baby whose existence could apparently get them both killed. She pulled her hood up, adjusted the satchel, and stepped back into the dark. 2 streets later, she passed a wall where a broadsheet had been freshly pasted, still wet at the corners. She stopped. Her own description looked back at her. Female, junior palace staff, brown hair, satchel, wanted for theft of royal property, approach with caution, report to Commander Darren McCoy, dead or alive. She read the words dead or alive twice. Then she looked down at the baby, who had both fists pressed against her collarbone and was working very hard on going to sleep. Royal property, Ella thought. They called her royal property. She felt something settle in her chest. Not bravery. Something quieter and more permanent than bravery. The kind of feeling that arrived when an argument was finished and the decision was already made. She pulled her hood lower. She walked into the dark city and did not look back. Chapter 2. The Lie She Has to Live. The baby needed a name before morning. Ella decided this practically, the way she decided most things. Not because sentiment demanded it, but because she could not keep thinking of her as the baby, or the child, or, God forbid, royal property. She needed something to call her when she was frightened, and needed something to hold on to. Names were anchors. She knew this from 4 years of watching Pauline name every cat that wandered into the laundry, and how each one came when called inside a week. She looked at the small face tucked against her collarbone as she moved through the back alleys toward the only place in this city she had left to go. Dark hair, fine as smoke. A mouth that was already working in sleep, practicing something. A small crease between her brows that made her look permanently thoughtful, as though she were working out a problem the rest of the world hadn't noticed yet. "Ren," Ella said quietly. The baby's mouth stopped moving. "Ren," she said again. The crease between the brows smoothed out, just slightly, just enough. Ren it was. Thelma Lowe lived above her own bread shop on Coster Street, which meant she was always awake before the city was, which meant the light was already burning in her upper window when Ella arrived at her door at the coldest hour of the night. Thelma had known Ella since she was 19 and newly arrived in the capital with a healer's apprentice certificate and no idea where to sleep. She had fed her soup and charged her half rent for the back room for 2 years before the palace position came through. She asked very few questions. This was her best quality. She opened the door, looked at Ella, looked at the satchel, looked at Ella again. "Come in," she said. Inside, warm, bread-smelling, Ella set the satchel on the table and lifted Wren out. Thelma's face did the thing faces did when they encountered a baby unexpectedly, a kind of involuntary softening, defenses dissolving before the mind could intervene. "Whose is she?" Thelma asked. Ella met her eyes. "Mine," she said, "for now." Thelma looked at her for a long moment. She was 61 years old and had survived 2 kings, 1 plague, and a husband who had eventually wandered off in the direction of the southern provinces and not returned. She understood, Ella thought, the specific grammar of, "I cannot tell you more than this." "How old?" "Days." "You'll need milk." "I know." "Goat is close enough to start." She was already moving to the cold pantry. "Warm it slowly. Not hot. Drip it from a cloth corner. She's too small for a cup." Ella held Wren and watched Thelma work, and felt, for the first time since the window, the specific relief of not being alone with something she didn't know how to carry. It lasted approximately 4 minutes. The knock at the door was not aggressive. 3 measured strikes. Thelma looked at Ella. Ella pressed back against the wall beside the hearth, pulling Wren tight against her chest. Thelma went to the door. A neighbor woman, Ella recognized her voice, the baker 2 doors down, leaning in with the conspiratorial warmth of someone delivering news. "Soldiers on the main street, Thelma, asking about a palace girl with a satchel. Broadsheets everywhere. Did you see?" "I didn't," Thelma said. Her voice was perfectly level. "Awful business. They say she stole something from the royal chambers, right out of the palace." A pause waited with the pleasure of drama. "They say it was something alive." "Imagine that," Thelma said. "You haven't seen anyone strange tonight?" "Only my cat," Thelma said pleasantly, and she was coming in, not going out. The neighbor laughed and moved on. Thelma closed the door. She turned around. Her eyes went to Wren, then to Ella's face. Something moved through her expression that Ella could not fully read, not accusation, not fear. Something older and more careful than either. "I won't ask," Thelma said. "Good," Ella said, "but you can't stay past morning." "I know." Thelma came and sat across from her. She looked at Wren, who had found the warm cloth corner and was working at it with total concentration. "She's beautiful," Thelma said quietly. "Yes," Ella agreed. "She looks like—" Thelma stopped. Ella looked at her sharply. "Like who?" But Thelma shook her head and pressed her mouth together. "No one," she said. "Get some sleep. I'll watch her first." In the 2 hours before dawn, while Thelma dozed in the chair with Wren against her chest, Ella sat at the kitchen table and read the first of the letters she'd taken from the palace floor. Not the sealed one. She wasn't ready for the sealed one. She read the others. 3 of them, written in a careful, educated hand on paper that had been folded and refolded many times. The first was from the Queen, to someone she called only S, brief, urgent, written weeks before the birth. "He suspects nothing yet, but if something happens, if I cannot get word out myself, you must take her somewhere he cannot follow. Not Valdric. Anyone but Valdric. He smiles at me and I see something behind it I cannot name, but I know it. Valdric." Ella turned the name over. Lord Valdric Morn, the king's closest advisor. The man who had stood at the king's right shoulder at every public mourning ceremony for the past 6 days, his expression composed into something that looked, from a distance, exactly like grief. The second letter was shorter. The midwife confirmed it. 2. He doesn't know. No one knows. S. If the worst comes, take the second one. The first will be visible from the moment of birth. The second might survive if no one knows to look. 2. Ella sat very still. 2. She looked at Ren sleeping against Thelma's chest. Then she thought about the royal announcement. The queen and her child, lost in the night. Singular. One child announced, one child mourned. She thought about the queen's hands frozen in that particular clutch of someone made to let go. Someone had known about one baby, had planned for one baby. Ren had survived because no one knew she existed. The third letter was unfinished, broken off mid-sentence in a handwriting that had started controlled and deteriorated into urgency. If you are reading this, S, then I am already. Please, she must never go back to the palace while she must never know who she is until it is safe. Keep her, raise her, love her, tell her. It ended there. Ella folded the letters carefully. She looked at the sealed one for a long time. The private wax stamp, not royal, intimate, the kind of seal used between people who trusted each other completely. She did not open it, not yet. She needed to be somewhere safer when she read the thing that might get her killed fastest. She tucked it back into the inner lining of the satchel. Then she sat in Thelma's kitchen and listened to the city coming awake outside, and thought about Lord Valdric Morn, standing 3 feet behind the grieving king, his expression composed into something that looked exactly like sorrow. She thought about how he had smiled when he thought no one was watching. She looked at Ren. "Nobody knows you exist," she said very quietly. "We are going to keep it that way." Ren slept on, both fists curled under her chin, entirely unbothered by the weight of her own survival. At first light, Ella picked her up, thanked Thelma with a look that tried to carry everything words couldn't, and walked out into the city. On the main street, a fresh broadsheet had been posted overnight. She stopped to read it. The description was more specific now. Brown hair, medium height, pale green palace uniform. Last seen near the eastern gate. At the bottom, a new line had been added. By order of Lord Valdric Morn, Royal Advisor. Reward for capture, living or dead, 50 gold. 50 gold. She looked at it a moment longer. Then she turned and walked in the opposite direction of the eastern gate and began the long work of disappearing. Chapter 3. The Hunter on Her Trail. The checkpoint at Quarter Bridge had been standing for 30 years and had never, in Ella's memory, been manned by more than 2 guards at a time. This morning, there were 8. She saw them from the far end of the market street and stopped walking. She was wearing a dress borrowed from Thelma's neighbor's wash line, brown, plain, nothing like a palace uniform, and she had her hair pinned up under a market woman's headscarf. Ren was wrapped against her chest under a wide shawl, in the way she had seen nursing mothers carry infants since she was a girl. From a distance, in bad light, they looked unremarkable. 8 guards was not bad light. She turned smoothly into the spice market and took the long route toward the river, keeping her pace unhurried, her eyes forward. The market was filling with the morning crowd. She let the crowd take her, moving with it rather than through it, matching the rhythm of people who had nowhere urgent to be. Ren slept. She had been sleeping more than Ella expected, which either meant she was healthy and content or meant something was wrong. And Ella, who had 4 years of healer's training and had assisted in exactly 2 infant deliveries, cycled between these 2 interpretations every 20 minutes. She's warm. She's fed. She's breathing evenly. She is 4 days old and was born in a palace room where her mother was murdered. She is fine. She turned down the narrow street behind the tanner's yard, which smelled terrible and was therefore reliably empty, and stopped to check Ren properly, unwrapped her enough to press one palm to the small chest, the rise and fall steady, the skin warm but not hot. Dark eyes cracking open at the disturbance, finding Ella's face, closing again. The small crease between the brows, thoughtful even in sleep. 8 guards, Ella told her. We're taking the river road. Ren had no objection. The river road meant the old mill district, which meant Renee Daniels' house, which meant a complication Ella had been hoping to avoid. Renee was the closest thing she had to a friend in this city. They had met in the apothecary supply line 3 years ago and had fallen into the habit of walking home together on market days. Renee was sharp, warm, deeply nosy, and had a husband who worked for the city guard. The husband, Isaac, was currently standing outside the house when Ella came around the corner. She nearly turned back. She didn't, because he had already seen her, and turning back from someone who had already seen you was worse than stopping. She kept walking. Natural pace, shoulders easy. Ella. Isaac Atkins was a large, unhurried man who had the particular stillness of someone who noticed everything and commented on very little. He was looking at the shawl. Early morning. "Herb run," she said. "The mill district has better fennel prices." He nodded slowly. His eyes moved to the shape beneath her shawl, and something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, but a careful recalibration. "Renee's inside," he said. "I won't stop," she said. "Just passing." He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he looked at the street behind her, then the street ahead, a movement so practiced she almost missed it. "River Road floods at the second bend this time of year," he said. "You'd want to take the high cut. Through the old orchard. Comes out past the mill bridge, north side. Guards don't bother with the north side." He said it the way he said everything, unhurried, looking somewhere else. She held his gaze for 1 second. "Thank you," she said. He nodded and went inside. She took the high cut through the old orchard. She felt him before she saw him. She was halfway through the orchard, the mill bridge visible through the bare trees ahead, when the back of her neck told her she was not alone. Not the vague unease of open spaces, something specific. The particular quality of stillness that meant something with intelligence was holding very still nearby. She kept walking. She did not change her pace. She let her senses work outward the way her healer's mentor had taught her, not grasping, just receiving. Behind her, 15 feet, maybe 20, moving when she moved, stopping when she stopped. Good. Very good, actually. She reached the mill bridge and stopped in the middle of it, looking down at the water. An ordinary woman checking the flood level. She put one hand on the railing. She waited. After a moment, she said, without turning, "You've been behind me since the tanner's yard." A pause, then footsteps, unhurried, and a man came to stand at the railing beside her. Not close, a respectful distance. He looked at the water the same way she did. She looked at him sideways. He was younger than the title implied, mid-30s at most, lean and long-limbed, with the kind of face that gave very little away. Dark coat, no uniform markings, but the coat was cut for movement and the boots were military. A short sword at his hip, worn with the ease of someone who had been carrying one since adolescence. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the river. "You're the one they sent," she said. "I am." "Commander's man?" A slight pause. "I report to Lord Morn." She felt the name land in her chest like a stone into cold water. She kept her face neutral. "Then you're here to bring me back." "That's what I was sent to do," he said. She noticed the tense. Was sent, not, am here. "And?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. He had still not looked directly at her. His eyes were on the river. "In the market," he said, "when I found you the first time." She remembered. The moment of eye contact through the crowd, his face, the stillness of him. "You stepped aside," she said. "I watched you for 11 minutes before that," he said. "The way you kept checking under the shawl, the way you positioned yourself in the crowd, always with your back to walls, always with a clear line to the exits." He paused. "And the way you talked to her." Ella said nothing. "I couldn't hear the words, but the way you talked to her." He stopped. Something moved briefly in his expression and was controlled back into stillness. "That's not how someone holds stolen property." The river moved below them, cold and indifferent. "What is your name?" she asked. "Darren," he said. "Darren McCoy." She felt the air leave her, slowly, carefully, so he wouldn't see it. Commander Darren McCoy. His name was on the wanted posters. His name was the name people were supposed to report her to. He had not found her in the market by accident. He had been tracking her since the palace. And he had stepped aside. "You're on the posters," she said. I am. Your name. They report to you. They do. And you let me walk. She finally turned to look at him directly. Why? He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he looked at her, the first time he had looked at her directly, and his eyes were the particular gray of river water in winter, calm on the surface with something moving underneath. Because of how you held her, he said simply. That's not a reason, she said, not a professional one. No, he agreed, it isn't. They stood on the bridge in the cold morning air. Below them, the river ran north toward the city and eventually toward the palace. Ren made a small sound against Ella's chest, not distress, the sound of someone shifting in sleep to a more comfortable position. His eyes went to the shawl. Lord Morn wants her found, he said, carefully. The word found doing work that returned was not doing. I know, she said. He told the king she was stolen by a thief. I know that too. The king believes him. A pause. He has no reason not to. She looked at Darren McCoy's face and tried to read what was underneath the river water calm. He had let her walk in the market. He had followed her here and announced himself openly. He had not reached for the sword. What do you want? She asked. He looked at Ren again. Something passed across his face, brief, unguarded, gone before she could name it. I want to understand what I stepped aside for, he said quietly, before I decide what to do next. The mill bridge creaked in the cold wind. Somewhere in the orchard behind them, a bird called once and went quiet. She made a decision. Not the whole truth, not yet, but enough. Walk with me, she said, north side, away from the checkpoints. He fell into step beside her without a word. Chapter 4. The Road Out. She did not tell him everything on the bridge. She told him enough. She told him she had taken a wrong turn in the palace corridor. She told him about the blood, the 2 women, the baby hidden in the corner. She told him about the royal seal on the wrapping cloth and the wanted poster she had read with her own description on it 30 minutes after climbing out of a window. She did not tell him about the letters. She did not tell him about Valdrick's name written in the Queen's own hand. She did not tell him about the sealed letter still tucked into the lining of her satchel, unopened, waiting. She watched his face while she talked. He listened the way careful people listened, without interrupting, without the small affirmative sounds that meant someone was only waiting for their turn to speak. He listened with his whole attention, and when she finished, he was quiet for long enough that she counted his breaths. The 2 women in the room, he said finally. You're certain they were dead? Yes. Both of them. Yes. He looked at the road ahead. The midwife assigned to the Queen's chamber was a woman named Odessa Shea. She disappeared the same night. He paused. Lord Morn told the king she fled in a panic after the Queen died, that she was too frightened to be found. Ella filed that name carefully. Odessa Shea, one of the women on that floor, a midwife. He explained her away, she said. Neatly, Darren said, as he explains most things. She glanced at him. There was something in the word most that carried weight he wasn't unpacking yet. How long have you worked for him? She asked. 3 years, a pause that had texture to it. Long enough? She didn't push, not yet. They made it to the North Mill Road before the first real problem arrived. A checkpoint she hadn't known about, newer than the ones she'd memorized, thrown up overnight, 2 soldiers and a cart barrier across the road. She saw it in time and pulled Darren sideways into the shadow of the mill wall. That wasn't there yesterday, she said. He's tightening the grid, Darren said. He was already looking left, reading the terrain with the practiced speed of someone who had navigated cities under pressure before. The canal path. 30 feet back, there's a gap in the wall. I know the canal path, she said. It floods. Not until the second bend. He looked at her. I know this city. She looked at him, at his face, at the sword at his hip, at the steady gray eyes. She took the canal path. It was narrow, dark, smelling of cold water and old stone, and it did not flood until the second bend exactly as he said. Wren woke during the passage and began working herself toward a complaint, and Ella pressed her lips to the small head and murmured nonsense steadily until she subsided. Darren walked behind her. He didn't crowd her. He maintained a distance that felt deliberate, respectful, the distance of someone who understood they were operating on borrowed trust. They came out on the north side of the mill bridge and kept moving. The second problem arrived 2 hours later, in the form of a woman Ella recognized. Gail Blackwell ran the secondary apothecary supply on the North Road. She was 60, sharp-eyed, and had sold Ella herbs every week for 4 years. She was standing outside her shop when they passed, and her eyes found Ella's face with the immediate recognition of someone who had done business with a person for years. "Ella Green," she said, loud enough to carry. Ella kept walking. "Morning, Gail. I've been seeing your name on walls all morning." Gail's voice was not hostile, but it was carrying, and 2 men near the water trough had looked up. "Palace business, they say." "Mistaken identity," Ella said pleasantly. She did not slow down. "That's the palace healer's assistant Satchel," Gail said. She had the unstoppable quality of someone who had survived 60 years by noticing details other people missed. "I've sold herbs to fill that satchel 100 times." Ella stopped. She turned around slowly. Gail was looking at her with an expression that was not quite accusation and not quite curiosity, and sat somewhere in between. The expression of a woman doing a calculation that could go several directions. Ella met her eyes. She shifted her shawl slightly, just enough, so Gail could see Wren's face. Something happened in Gail's expression. A stillness. The calculation reaching a conclusion she hadn't anticipated. "She's days old," Ella said quietly, "and someone wants her dead. That's all I can tell you." Gail looked at Wren for a long moment. Her jaw tightened. She looked at Ella. She looked at the 2 men by the water trough, who had already lost interest and returned to their conversation. "There's a road south of the old granary," she said briskly. "Cuts through the Fenwick farmland, comes out at the Tallow Ford. Guards never use it. The farmers' dogs make it not worth their while." She turned back toward her shop door. "I haven't seen you in 6 months," she said. "Not since before winter." She went inside and closed the door. Ella breathed. Beside her, Darren said nothing. He had stayed back during the entire exchange, she realized, had positioned himself where he was visible enough to be present, but not close enough to be associated with her, giving her room to handle it herself. She looked at him. He lifted one shoulder slightly. It was the first gesture she had seen from him that wasn't entirely controlled. She took the road south of the granary. The Fenwick farm dogs were enormous and enthusiastic, and Darren dealt with them with the calm efficiency of someone who had encountered farm dogs before, crouching low and letting them smell his hands without flinching until they lost interest and wandered away. Ella watched this and filed it. They reached the Tallow Ford by mid-afternoon, and that was where the third problem was waiting. Not soldiers. A boy, 14, maybe 15, sitting on the far bank with a fishing line in the water, and a look of absolute boredom that shifted into something else entirely when he saw them cross. He stood up. He was looking at Darren. "You're the commander's man," he said. "I've seen you at the garrison." Darren stopped. "You have." "They're looking for her." The boy's eyes moved to Ella, to the shawl, back to Darren. The boredom had been replaced by something more complicated, the expression of someone who understood that he had stumbled into a situation with more weight than he knew how to measure. "There's a reward." 50 gold, Ella thought. To a boy who fished alone at a ford, 50 gold was an incomprehensible number. She watched Darren. He crouched down to the boy's level. He did it without urgency, without threat, the way he had done it with the dogs. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sam," the boy said. "Sam Haynes." "Sam?" Darren's voice was level and unhurried. "How long have you been fishing this ford?" "Since I was small." "You know this land well, then?" It wasn't a question. "Better than anyone," Sam said, with the particular pride of a boy who had one thing he was genuinely expert at. "Then you know," Darren said, that there are things that happen on this land that a man who knows it well has simply not seen, because he was looking at the water. Sam looked at him for a long time. He looked at Ella, at the shawl. He was trying to see what was underneath it, she realized, not from malice, from the same instinct that had driven her through that palace door, the instinct toward a sound too small to ignore. Wren, as though she understood her cue, made her small, wondering sound, the sound of something noticing warmth for the first time. Sam's expression did the same thing Thelma's had done, the involuntary softening, the defenses gone before the mind intervened. He sat back down. He picked up his fishing line. "Water's running fast today," he said to no one in particular. "Hard to see anything but the current." They crossed the ford. When Ella looked back from the far bank, Sam had not moved. He was watching his line, his back to them, entirely absorbed in the serious business of fishing. She faced forward. The city was behind them. The road ahead ran through open farmland toward the tree line of the Fenwick Woods, and beyond the woods, 3 days' walk, the free territory. No checkpoints, no garrison, no broadsheets. She adjusted Wren against her chest. 3 days, she said. 2.5, Darren said, if we move well. She looked at him. "Why are you still here?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because you haven't told me everything," he said. "And what you haven't told me is the part that matters most." She held his gaze. He was right, and they both knew it. "When we're out of the city's reach," she said, "then I'll show you." He nodded once, and they walked into the open road together, the city at their backs, the woods ahead, and Wren asleep between them, unknowing, content, furiously alive. Chapter 5. What the Letters Said. They walked through the night and made camp once, briefly, in the hollow of a fallen oak wide enough to sit inside with their backs against the dry inner wood and the cold held mostly at bay. Darren built the fires small and efficient, the kind that gave heat without giving light beyond arm's reach. Ella fed Wren with the supplies Thelma had pressed into her satchel, warm goat milk drawn into a cloth corner, and watched the baby work at it with the concentrated fury she brought to everything. Darren watched, too, from across the small fire, and said nothing. She had noticed he did this, held silence the way other people held furniture, like something useful to lean against. He didn't fill space with noise. In the palace, in the garrison, she imagined he was surrounded by men who talked constantly to prove they were unafraid. She understood why he would have learned to be the other kind. "You have a question?" she said. "Several," he said, none of them urgent. "Ask one." He was quiet a moment. "How did you know she was still alive? In that room? You heard something from the corridor, but the room was sealed. How did you know it wasn't just settling walls, cold air?" She looked at Wren, at the furious working of the small mouth. "I didn't," she said. "I just went." He nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. "Your turn," he said. "How long have you known about Morn?" The fire moved. His face was still. "Known what specifically?" he said. "That he's not what he presents himself to be." A long pause. "I have suspected," he said carefully, "for approximately 8 months, that certain orders I was given did not originate with the king." "What kind of orders?" His jaw tightened once. "The kind that ended careers. Quietly. Men who asked questions Morn didn't want asked, transferred to remote postings, discharged on manufactured charges." He looked at the fire. "One man died. It was called an accident. But you stayed." "A man inside the structure," he said, "is more useful than a man outside it shouting." She looked at him across the fire. The gray eyes, the controlled face, the careful precision of every word he chose. "You've been waiting," she said, "for something you could actually use." He met her gaze. "And then a palace girl climbed out of a window with a baby," he said, "and Lord Morn personally put his name on the warrant, in the middle of the night, without waiting for the king's seal." She felt it land. She had not noticed that. She thought about the broadsheet. By order of Lord Valdric Morn, not by order of the king. He was afraid, she said. Very, Darren said, which meant whatever you had was worth being afraid of. Wren had finished feeding and was now engaged in the serious work of falling asleep, her fist against Ella's collarbone, her expression gradually releasing its concentration into something softer. Ella held her and watched the fire and made her decision. She reached into the satchel. She gave him the 3 letters first. She watched his face as he read them. He read slowly. He went back and read the first one again. He set them down on his knee and looked at the fire, and she could see him reassembling everything he knew into a new shape, the way you reassembled a map when you discovered a river you hadn't known was there. Twins, he said. Yes. He didn't know. The Queen didn't know either until near the end. That's what the second letter says. She paused. He planned for 1 child. He had no reason to look for another. And the midwife hit her and ran. He looked at Wren, and got as far as the palace corridor before someone caught up with her, Ella said quietly. Yes. He was silent for a moment. The Queen's letter calls her S. Odessa Shea, Ella said. You told me her name on the bridge, the midwife who disappeared. Something moved in his face, a brief, unguarded thing she hadn't seen before. Not grief, exactly. The expression of someone who had just understood the full shape of something they had been looking at only partly. I knew her, he said. Not well. She was kind. He stopped. She had a husband. A good man. He never knew what happened to her. Ella held Wren a little tighter. She ran until she had nothing left, she said. She died trying to get Wren to safety. That matters. Someone should know that. Darren nodded once. His jaw was tight. The sealed letter, he said. She had been looking at it for 2 days. It sat in her palm now, small and heavy, the private wax seal intact. Not the royal crest, something personal. I don't know what's in it, she said. I've been afraid it's the thing that gets us both killed fastest. Possibly, he said. Or it's the thing that saves her. She broke the seal. The letter was written in a different hand than the others, larger, less practiced, the hand of someone more accustomed to signing documents than composing them. It was short, 12 lines. She read it once to herself. Then she read it aloud, because he needed to hear every word. If this letter reaches the hands I intend, then the worst has happened, and I was not fast enough to prevent it. I write this knowing Valdric moves against us, and I have run out of time to move against him first. What follows is what I know and what I can prove. Valdric Morn has been selling military intelligence to the eastern provinces for 3 years. The documentation is hidden in the East Archive, 3rd vault, under my father's regimental seal. He has been waiting for my death to access it fully. He cannot access it while I live because the vault requires my blood to open. He does not know about the second child. If she lives, she carries my blood. She can open the vault. Her name, if she has been given none, should be— Ella's voice stopped. She looked at the last line. She read it again. Her throat tightened in a way she hadn't expected. She looked at Wren, sleeping against her chest, entirely unaware that her father had written her name into existence on a piece of paper before he ever held her. What does it say? Darren asked. His voice was quiet. Her name, Ella said. He wrote her name. A pause. What is it? She looked at the sleeping face, the dark hair fine as smoke, the small crease between the brows that smoothed out in sleep. She thought about the name she had already given her, in a dark alley, for no reason except that it had arrived whole and certain. She looked at the letter again. Her name, if she has been given none, should be Wren. For her mother, who loved the small birds that sang through winter. She pressed her lips together hard. I already named her that, she said, before I read this. Darren said nothing for a moment. Who wrote this letter? She asked, though she already suspected. The handwriting, he said. He picked it up carefully. The signature at the bottom. She had not looked at the signature. She looked now. King Aldrich Vane. The fire popped. Outside the fallen oak, the night was very quiet. He knew, she said. He knew Morn was moving against him. He knew about the second child. He wrote this as insurance, Darren said, in case he didn't survive long enough to act on it himself. She looked at him across the fire. He's alive, she said. The king. He survived. He survived, Darren said, but Morn told him the child died with the queen, and the king has no reason to doubt him. A pause. He is a man destroyed by grief, operating under the guidance of the man who caused that grief, for 6 months. The weight of it settled over the small fire. She thought of the documentation in the East Archive, the third vault under the king's father's regimental seal. She can open the vault. She looked at Wren. She's the key, she said. Yes, to proving everything. Yes, which is why he needs her dead. Yes, Darren said, not just because she's the heir, because she's the proof. Wren slept on, one fist curled under her chin, her breathing slow and even, entirely unconcerned with the architecture of her own importance. Ella folded the king's letter carefully and placed it back in the satchel. Her hands were steady. She was surprised to find them steady. We can't go to the free territory, she said. Darren looked at her. We have to go to the king, she said. Morn stands between you and the king, he said. He has for 6 months. Every message, every visitor, every report. He controls the king's information completely. I know. She looked at the satchel. But she can open a vault that proves everything, and I have 3 letters in the queen's own hand. She met his eyes. We just need to get into the same room as the king, without Morn knowing we're coming. Darren was quiet for a long time. I know a way in, he said finally, but it will cost me everything I have left inside that structure. She held his gaze. I know, she said. I'm sorry. He shook his head once. Don't be. He looked at Wren. A man inside the structure, he said quietly, echoing his own words from the bridge, is only useful if he eventually uses what he's built. The fire burned low between them. Outside, the night was still and cold, and the road back to the capital was long. They sat in the hollow of the fallen oak with the king's sleeping daughter between them and the proof of a conspiracy in a satchel, and in the morning they turned around and walked back the way they had come. Chapter 6. The Wolf Who Won't Leave. They were 2 hours from the city when Darren stopped walking. She turned. He was standing in the middle of the road, looking at the tree line to the east with the particular stillness that meant he was thinking hard about something he hadn't said yet. There's a problem, he said. One specific one? The way in, I mentioned. He looked at her. It requires me to go first. Alone. To make contact with someone inside the garrison who I trust, who can get us to the king without going through Morn's channels. He paused. It will take a day, maybe 2. She understood immediately. You need me to wait. Outside the city. Somewhere safe. He looked at Wren. Somewhere she can't be found while I'm moving. She thought about this. The logic was clean. A man moving alone through a city he knew, using contacts he had built over 3 years, was invisible in a way a woman with a baby could never be. Where? She asked. There's a woman, he said. She lives on the Costa Road, a half-mile past the North Gate. She is not connected to the palace, not connected to the garrison. She has housed people I needed housed before, without asking questions. He paused. Her name is Dorothy MacDonald. She is 70 years old and she grows herbs, and she is the most reliable person I have ever known. Ella looked at him. You have a network, she said. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but the shape of one. I told you, a man inside the structure is more useful than one outside it shouting. You've been building toward something for 8 months. Yes. And this is it. He held her gaze. This is it. She looked at the road, at the city in the distance, its towers just visible above the tree line in the gray morning light. She thought about walking back into range of the checkpoints, the broadsheets, the 50 gold reward. She thought about the king's letter in her satchel. She can open the vault. "All right," she said. "Show me where Dorothy lives." Dorothy MacDonald was not 70, she was closer to 80, and she moved through her small stone cottage with the brisk efficiency of someone who had long ago decided that age was an administrative inconvenience rather than a physical reality. She opened the door before they knocked, looked at Darren with the expression of a woman who had seen this particular man arrive with complications before, looked at Ella, looked at Wren, and stepped aside. "Kitchen," she said. "Both of you. You look like you've been walking all night." They had been walking all night. Her kitchen was warm and smelled of dried lavender and something savory on the fire. She fed them without ceremony. Thick soup, bread, no questions. And then she looked at Darren with the specific look of a woman waiting for the part where she found out what she was being asked to do. He told her, not everything, enough. She listened the way he listened. Complete attention, no interruptions. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Wren, who was awake and had found a dried lavender bundle hanging from the kitchen beam and was staring at it with complete absorption. "How long?" Dorothy asked. 2 days, Darren said. 3 at most. Dorothy nodded once. She looked at Ella. "Can you cook?" "Adequately," Ella said. "Good. You're my granddaughter visiting from the South Province. The baby is yours. Your husband is a merchant, currently traveling." She said it with the brisk practicality of someone assembling a story the way a carpenter assembled a chair. Functional, sturdy, no unnecessary ornamentation. "Anyone who asks." "Anyone who asks," Ella agreed. Darren stood up. He looked at Ella, and something in the look was different from the way he had looked at her before, more direct, less controlled, as though the decision he had made on the road the previous night had moved something that had previously been held in place. "I'll be back," he said. 3 days at the outside." "I know," she said. He looked at Wren one more time. That brief, unguarded thing crossed his face again, the thing she still hadn't named. Then he was gone. The first day was fine. Dorothy was efficient company, present without being intrusive, capable of sitting in silence without making the silence uncomfortable. She showed Ella her herb garden, dormant under its winter straw, and they talked about growing and harvesting and the specific properties of cold-weather plants in the way two people talked when they were both deliberately not talking about the thing they were both thinking about. Wren charmed Dorothy completely by the afternoon, which Ella suspected was inevitable. Dorothy held her with the practiced ease of someone who had held many babies across many decades, and Wren regarded her with the grave, considering expression she used when she was deciding about someone. She decided favorably. By evening, she was reaching for Dorothy's silver hair with both hands, and Dorothy was letting her, talking to her in a low, steady voice about the names of herbs and the properties of winter light. "She's very alert for her age," Dorothy said. "She's been alert since the beginning," Ella said. Dorothy looked at her over Wren's head. "She looks like someone," she said, carefully, the same way Thelma had said it. Ella met her eyes. "Yes," she said, "just that." Dorothy nodded and said nothing more. The second day was harder, not because anything went wrong, because nothing went wrong, and the nothing going wrong left too much space for everything she had been moving too fast to think about. She sat by Dorothy's kitchen window in the afternoon while Wren slept and watched the road and thought about the king's letter, about the vault, about what happened after, if there was an after, if Darren got them into the same room as the king, if the letters were enough, if the vault opened, if Morn was exposed. What happened to Wren then? She was the heir. She was a princess. She was the future of a kingdom, the proof of a conspiracy, the key to a vault that held evidence of treason. She was also the person who had learned the word for warmth pressed against Ella's chest in a drainage channel under the palace wall. Ella pressed her hand flat on the cold window glass and looked at the road. She had not let herself think this far forward. She understood now that this had been deliberate. Thinking forward meant thinking about the moment the king took his daughter back, and she was not ready to think about that. She heard Ren stir in the next room. The small sound, half complaint, half inquiry, that meant she was waking and taking inventory of her surroundings. Ella went to her. She lifted her and held her against her shoulder and felt the small head tuck immediately under her chin with the confident ease of something finding its place. "I know," she said quietly. "I'm here." Ren settled. Ella stood in Dorothy's spare room and held her and did not think about what happened after. Darren came back on the third morning. He came to the kitchen door, not the front. The specific knock, 3 short strikes, that Dorothy had told her to listen for. Ella was already up. She opened the door. He looked tired. Not the surface tired of a missed night's sleep, but the deeper kind. The kind that came from 3 days of operating in a place where every conversation was a calculation. "Come in," she said. He sat at the kitchen table. Dorothy put soup in front of him without being asked. He ate half of it before he spoke. "I found my contact," he said. "A man named Blair Holmes. He has been the king's private secretary for 11 years. He is loyal to the king, not to Morn, to the king specifically, and he has been watching Morn's influence expand for 6 months with no way to challenge it." "He'll help us?" "He already has." Darren reached into his coat and set something on the table. A folded document, sealed with a mark she didn't recognize. "That is a private summons. It comes from Blair's office, which reports directly to the king, bypassing Morn's channels entirely. It summons a witness in a matter of royal security to a private audience." She looked at it. "Will Morn see it?" "Not before we're in the room." He met her eyes. "Blair has been waiting for a reason to use a channel Morn doesn't control. He has been building it for months, specifically because he suspected the time would come when he needed it." A pause. "He's been building it the same way I've been building what I built." She thought about that. 2 men inside the structure, both waiting, both building toward the same thing from different directions, neither knowing about the other. "He wants to meet her," Darren said. He was looking at Ren, who was in Dorothy's arms across the kitchen, having her hair admired. "Before we go to the king, he needs to see her for himself." Ella looked at Ren. "When?" she asked. "Tonight," Darren said. "After dark. His private office in the lower east wing. One entrance Morn doesn't monitor." He paused. "Ella." She looked at him. He had not used her name before, not once in 4 days of walking and talking and sitting across fires. "This is the part," he said carefully, "where it becomes very difficult to go back." She held his gaze, the gray eyes, steady, asking her something he wasn't putting into words. "I know," she said. "Once we walk into that office—" "I know," she said again. "Darren—" He stopped. "I stopped being able to go back," she said, "the moment I picked her up." Something in his face shifted. Not the brief, unguarded thing she had seen before. Something more settled, more decided. He looked at her the way people looked at something they had stopped trying not to see. Dorothy, across the kitchen, was pretending to look at Ren's hair and was absolutely listening to every word. "Tonight, then," Ella said. "Tonight," he agreed. Ren grabbed Dorothy's silver hair and announced something at length, and everyone in the kitchen looked at her and forgot, for one moment, everything that was coming. Chapter 7. The Man Behind the Curtain. Blair Holmes was smaller than she expected. She had built him in her mind during the walk to the palace. A man who had spent 11 years as the king's private secretary, who had been quietly building a counter-channel against Morn for months, who had agreed within hours to help a wanted woman and a compromised commander bring down the king's closest advisor. She had expected someone large with the weight of his own consequence. He was slight, gray-haired, with careful hands and the permanent slight squint of someone who had spent decades reading documents in inadequate light. He opened the lower east wing door himself, looked at them both, looked at Ren, and stepped back without a word. His office was small and extraordinarily ordered. Every document stacked with precision. 2 candles, placed for maximum coverage of the reading surface. A single window, shuttered. No decorations except a small painted portrait on the far wall. A woman and 2 children, the paint worn at the edges from years of being in the same room as someone who looked at it often. He closed the door. He turned around. He looked at Ren for a long time. Ella held her ground and let him look. Ren was awake, her dark eyes moving around the new space with the systematic curiosity she brought to every new room. She found Blair's face and settled on it with the grave, considering expression Ella knew well. Her mother's coloring, Blair said quietly, and the king's hands, even at this size. He looked at Ella. Where did you find her? She told him, all of it this time, the corridor, the room, the 2 women on the floor, the seal on the wrapping cloth. The letters, the sealed one last. She gave him the king's letter. He read it standing up. She watched the color leave his face in increments, the way water left a glass tilting slowly toward empty. When he finished, he set it down on his desk with the careful movements of a man making sure his hands didn't shake. He wrote this the night before she died, Blair said. The king. He knew it was coming, and he wrote this. Yes, Ella said. And Morn has had him grieving an empty coffin for 6 months. His voice was level and absolutely furious beneath the level. 6 months of managing his grief, 6 months of controlling his decisions. Every appointment, every decree, every military order. He pressed his fingers flat on the desk. The Eastern Province intelligence sales. I found irregularities 8 months ago and reported them to Morn directly. He stopped. He told me the investigation was ongoing. He was the investigation, Darren said. Yes. Blair looked at the letter again. The 3rd vault. I know that vault. I have known that vault my entire career and never known what was in it. He looked at Ren. She can open it. When she's older, Ella said. She doesn't need to be older. Blair's voice was careful. The vault requires royal blood. An infant's hand pressed to the seal is sufficient. The magic doesn't require intention, only lineage. Ella felt the room shift slightly. She looked at Ren, at the small hands curled now against her chest. Tonight? She asked. The vault first, Blair said. Then the king. We bring him both, his daughter and the proof simultaneously. He needs to see them together. He needs to understand them together. He looked at Darren. Morn is in the East Wing tonight, late meeting with the military council. He won't be near the king's private chambers for 2 hours. 2 hours, Darren said. That's enough. It needs to be. Blair looked at the portrait on the wall, the woman, the 2 children. He looked at it the way Ella had thought, often from the same room for years. My wife used to say that the right moment and the right information arriving at the same time was not luck. It was preparation recognizing its hour. He turned back to them. This is the hour. He picked up the candle and opened the inner door. The East Archive was 3 levels below the palace's main floor, accessible through a servant's passage that Blair navigated from memory, his candle making their shadows enormous and strange on the stone walls. Darren walked behind Ella, close enough that she could feel his presence without turning to check. Ren was very quiet. Not the quiet of sleep, the quiet of attention. She was taking in the dark passage with her head up and her eyes open, and Ella had the unsettling sense, not for the first time, that this child understood more about her circumstances than a 6-day-old had any business understanding. The 3rd vault was at the end of the archive corridor. Iron door, old and massive, set flush with the stone wall. No visible lock. Only a flat iron panel at waist height, the size of a hand, smooth and dark and cold-looking. Blair held the candle close. At the center of the panel was a seal pressed into the iron. A family crest. Not the royal public crest, something older and more private. The king's father's regimental mark. Here, Blair said quietly. Ella looked at Ren. She shifted her so that one small hand was free. Ren looked at the iron panel with the focused expression she used for dried lavender bundles and crow feathers and anything else that interested her. May I? Ella asked her, as though she could answer. She pressed Ren's open palm flat against the seal. For a moment, nothing. Then a sound. Low, resonant, felt more in the chest than heard with the ears. A mechanical shifting somewhere deep in the door. The iron panel warmed under Ren's hand, or seemed to, or perhaps she imagined it. The door swung open. Blair exhaled, one short, controlled breath. Inside, shelves, documents, dozens of them, bound and sealed, ledgers, correspondence bundles tied with the kind of cord used in official military records. Blair moved to the third shelf without hesitation. He knew, Ella realized, had known for years exactly what he was looking for, had been waiting only for the ability to reach it. He pulled a bound ledger and 2 correspondence bundles and opened the ledger by the candle. His face, already pale, went the color of old wax. 3 years, he said. His voice was very quiet. Every Eastern Province military movement, garrison deployments, supply routes, defensive weaknesses. He turned a page. Sold. Every piece of it sold. He looked up. Men died in the eastern border skirmishes last year. Our men, because the other side knew exactly where they would be. The archive was absolutely silent. Ella held Ren against her chest and felt the weight of what they were holding. Not just paper, not just evidence, the specific gravity of the moment when an abstracted suspicion became concrete, undeniable, irrevocable fact. "Take what you need," Darren said. Blair took the ledger and both correspondence bundles. He closed the vault. The door sealed itself with the same deep, resonant sound. They went back up through the servants' passage. The king's private receiving room was on the second floor of the north wing. Blair led them through 3 corridors and 2 staircases, his candle shielded, his pace measured. Darren walked beside Ella now, not behind, and once, when they stopped at a corner while Blair checked the passage ahead, his hand came up briefly and rested at the small of her back. Not a claim. Something quieter. A steadiness offered. She didn't move away. Blair signaled. "Clear." They moved. The receiving room door was plain, unmarked, indistinguishable from the storage rooms on either side. Blair knocked twice, then once. A specific pattern. Footsteps inside. A pause. She imagined someone checking, listening, deciding. The door opened. The man inside was not the king. He was perhaps 40, broad-shouldered, wearing plain clothes over what was clearly a soldier's frame. He looked at Blair, then at Darren, then at Ella, and his eyes stopped on Ren, and something in his face went very still. "Roger," Blair said. "We need the king, now. The private entrance." Roger Hardy, she would learn the name a moment later, looked at Ren one more time with that particular stillness. Then he pulled the door fully open. "He's been awake," Roger said. "He doesn't sleep much anymore." They went in. The private entrance to the king's chambers was a narrow door set in the north wall of the receiving room, unremarkable, the kind of door that vanished in plain sight. Roger knocked twice, different pattern from Blair's. A long pause, then the sound of a bolt drawn back. The door opened. She had seen the king's portrait in every room of the palace for 4 years. The portrait showed a man in formal posture, composed, carrying his authority like a well-fitted coat. The man in the doorway was not that man. He was still recognizably himself. Dark hair, though it needed cutting, the strong jaw, the height. But 6 months of grief managed by the man who caused it had worked on him the way weather worked on stone. He was still there. The essential shape of him was intact, but the surface had been worn. His eyes moved from Blair to Darren to Ella. Then they found Ren. And everything that 6 months of grief had done to his face, all of it, stopped. He went absolutely still in the doorway. Ren, tucked against Ella's chest, looked back at him with her dark eyes and her grave, considering expression. She was doing the things she did, Ella knew, the systematic assessment, taking inventory. The king's mouth opened. Nothing came out. His hand came up slowly and gripped the doorframe. "Who?" His voice was barely sound. He stopped. He looked at Blair with an expression that was equal parts question and something too large and too fragile to be named. "Blair, Your Majesty," Blair said quietly, "there is a great deal you need to know, and not much time." The king's eyes went back to Ren. Ren reached out one hand toward his face. He flinched. Not from fear, the flinch of someone encountering something they had believed gone from the world and finding the encounter almost more than they could hold. "Come inside," he said. His voice had found itself again, barely. "All of you. Come inside." They went in. Chapter 8. The Trap and the Choice. The king's private sitting room was nothing like his portrait rooms. No formal furnishings, no displayed authority. A fire burning low, 2 chairs angled toward it, a writing desk covered in papers that had the look of work done at hours when sleep refused to come. A half-eaten meal on a side table, gone cold. The room of a man living inside his own grief with nowhere else to put it. King Aldrich Vane sat in one of the chairs by the fire and held his daughter for the first time. Ella had handed her over without letting herself think about the handing over. She had simply done it, the way she had done everything since the palace corridor, before the argument finished, before the cost could be fully calculated. Ren had not cried. She had looked at the king's face with her grave, systematic attention, and then she had done the thing she did with people she had decided about. She had grabbed his finger, his large hand, her impossibly small fist, and she had held on with the grip that had no business being that strong. The king had made a sound Ella would never describe to anyone, the sound of something that had been held underwater for 6 months suddenly breaking the surface. Blair stood near the writing desk with the vault document spread before him, speaking in the low, controlled voice of a man delivering information that required precision. Darren stood by the door. Roger Hardy was in the outer room. Ella stood near the fire and watched the king with his daughter and tried not to feel the thing she was feeling. She felt it anyway. Blair spoke for 20 minutes. The king listened without interrupting. He held Ren against his chest with the careful deliberateness of someone handling something they were terrified of damaging, and he listened to 20 minutes of his most trusted advisor's treason laid out document by document, letter by letter, in Blair's precise and merciless detail. When Blair finished, the room was silent except for the fire. "How long have you known?" the king asked. "Suspected 8 months," Blair said. "Known tonight." "And you?" He looked at Darren. "You were his man." "I was inside his structure," Darren said. "There is a difference." The king looked at him for a long moment. Whatever he was measuring, Darren apparently passed it. He looked at Ella. "You found her in the palace corridor," he said. "You read the letters. You understood what you had." He paused. "And you came back." "I tried not to," she said honestly. "We were 2 hours from the free territory." Something moved in his expression. "Why did you come back?" She looked at Ren. "Because she can open a vault," she said. "And the vault is here. And the man who had your queen killed is still standing next to you every day." He was quiet. "My wife wrote her name," he said, "in that letter. She wrote her name before she was born." "Yes." He looked down at Ren. "How did you know?" "I didn't, I just—" She stopped, thought about the dark alley, the small face, the name that arrived whole and certain. "It arrived," she said. "I don't have a better explanation." The king pressed his lips to Ren's hair. His eyes closed briefly. Then he opened them and looked at Blair, and the softness was still there, but underneath it, something had hardened into the shape of a man who intended to act. "We move tonight," he said. Before he... The outer door opened. Not Roger's knock, not any knock. The door simply opened, and Valdric Morn walked in. He was exactly as she had seen him in the public mourning ceremonies, composed, well-dressed, carrying himself with the particular ease of someone who had never needed to announce his authority because it had always simply been assumed. He took in the room in one sweep, Blair with the documents, Darren by the door, Ella by the fire, and his face did not change. His eyes stopped on Ren. For one fraction of a second, something moved behind them, gone before it fully formed. Then the composure was back, total and seamless. "Your Majesty," he said. His voice was warm with concern. "I came to check on you. I heard there were unauthorized visitors in the North Wing." His eyes moved to Ella with the expression of a man encountering something distasteful. "I see the thief has been brought in. Good. I'll have the guard—" "Valdric." The king's voice was very quiet. Morn stopped. "Sit down," the king said. A pause. Something shifted in Morn's posture, so subtle she almost missed it. A recalibration. "Of course," he said pleasantly. He sat in the second chair by the fire as though he had been invited for an evening conversation. His eyes moved to the vault documents on the desk. She watched him see them, watched him understand what they were. He looked at Blair. His expression did not change. "Blair," he said warmly, "working late." "The third vault," Blair said. "The king's father's seal." Morn looked at the documents for a moment. Then he looked at Ren in the king's arms. Then he looked at Ella. "Remarkable," he said. His voice was still pleasant. "A palace servant, a disgraced commander, and an old secretary." He smiled. "You've all been very busy." "The Eastern Province intelligence records," the king said. 3 years of them." "Your Majesty, whatever these people have told you—" "I have read them myself," the king said, "in the last 10 minutes. My own father's military records, my own seal, the correspondence in your handwriting." The pleasantness in Morn's face thinned, just slightly. "I see," he said. The room was very still. Then Morn looked at Ella and the pleasantness dropped entirely. Not to rage, something colder than rage. The expression of a man shifting from one strategy to another with the practiced ease of someone who always had more than one. "You could have walked away," he said to her, almost conversationally. "I was told you were 2 hours from the territory border." He tilted his head. "Why didn't you?" She said nothing. "Sentiment," he said. He looked at Ren with an expression that made her arm tighten involuntarily around empty air, the instinct to take Ren back, to put herself between them, firing before her mind caught up. "It's a liability, sentiment. It makes people make choices that aren't in their interest." He looked back at Ella. "You should have kept walking." "Probably," she said. "I'm going to give you one opportunity," he said, "because I am not without mercy." He reached into his coat. Darren moved, fast, controlled, placing himself between Morn and the king in a single motion, his sword drawn. Morn stopped. His hand came out holding a folded document, nothing else. He set it on the arm of the chair. "A letter of passage," he said. "The woman, the child, free to go anywhere in the kingdom. A house, land, a sum sufficient for a comfortable life." He looked at Ella. "Walk away. Tonight. Take the child and go." He paused. "Leave the documents." The fire crackled. She felt the room waiting. She looked at the document on the chair arm. She thought about Dorothy's kitchen, Ren reaching for lavender bundles, the road south, the free territory 2.5 days away. She looked at the king holding his daughter. She looked at Morn's face and saw, behind the composure, the thing the queen had written about in her letter. "I see something behind it I cannot name, but I know it." She knew it now. She had a name for it. He was not afraid of the documents. He was afraid of Ren. Not politically. She had understood the political fear in the hollow of the fallen oak. This was something else, something personal. She looked at his face and thought about the night in the palace corridor, the 2 women on the floor, the queen's hands frozen in that particular clutch. He had been in that room. She knew it the way she had known to go through the palace window, before the argument finished. "You were there," she said quietly. "When she died. You were in the room." The composure cracked. One line, hairline fine, running through it. "You watched it happen," she said. "Or you did it yourself. And then you told the king his wife and child died in childbirth, and you stood next to him at the funeral, and you—" Her voice was steady. She was surprised to find it steady. "You looked at him grieving something you caused." Morn stood up. Darren's sword came level. "You have no proof of that," Morn said. His voice was still controlled, but the pleasantness was entirely gone now, and what was underneath it was what the queen had seen and not been able to name. "I have the queen's letters," Ella said, "written in her own hand, naming you." She reached into her satchel. "And I have this." She held up the sealed letter. Morn's eyes went to it, and she saw it, the recognition. He knew that seal. He had been looking for that letter. "You searched the room after," she said. "You found the 3 letters, but not this one because she was lying on it." She looked at him steadily. "The king wrote this before he knew what you were planning. He wrote down everything he knew and sealed it for evidence." She held his gaze. "You didn't find it because it was under her body, and you didn't look carefully enough because you were in a hurry." Morn's face was very still. "It names you," she said, "specifically, with dates." It was a partial lie and a partial truth. The king's letter named the treason. It did not specifically name Morn in the queen's death, but Morn did not know exactly what it said, and the queen's own letters named him clearly enough. She watched him calculate. She watched him reach the calculation's end. He moved, not for her, not for Darren, for the door. Fast, decisive, the move of someone who had always had an exit strategy and was executing it now. Roger Hardy was in the doorway. Morn stopped. Roger was not a small man. He looked at Morn with the flat, patient expression of someone who had been waiting a long time for this specific moment. "Sir," Roger said pleasantly, "I think you should sit back down." Behind her, the king spoke. His voice was quiet and absolutely final. "Valdric," he said, "it's over." Morn sat down. He did not speak again. The king held Ren with one arm, and with his free hand he picked up the letter of passage Morn had set on the chair arm. He looked at it for a moment. He set it in the fire. He watched it burn. Then he looked at Blair. "Send for the council," he said. "All of them. Tonight." He looked at Roger. "Secure him." He looked at Darren. "I'll want your full account in writing by morning." Each of them moved. The king looked at Ella last. Ren was asleep against his chest, her fist curled under her chin, entirely unbothered by the architecture of her own rescue. He looked at his daughter for a moment, then he looked up. "You burned the house down to build a better one," he said quietly, "at considerable cost to yourself." She said nothing. "We will talk," he said, "when this is settled. There are things I owe you that I don't yet have the words for." She nodded once. He looked back at Ren. Something in his face was different from every version of him she had seen tonight. Not the formal king of the portraits, not the grief-worn man in the doorway, not the hardened man who said, "We move tonight." Something quieter, something that had been waiting 6 months for its reason to exist. A father. Ella looked away and felt the thing she had been not feeling since Dorothy's spare room settle over her completely. She let it. Chapter 9. The King's Reckoning. The military council arrived in stages over the following hour. Ella watched them come from the corner of the room where she had positioned herself, close to the fire, out of the way, holding Ren, who had woken during the commotion, and was now conducting her systematic assessment of each new face that entered. 7 men, various ages, various degrees of sleep-disrupted irritability that shifted into alert attention the moment they registered Blair's expression and the documents on the desk. Darren stood near the window. He had sheathed his sword. His face was back to its river-water calm, but she had learned, in 4 days of walking beside him, to read the thing moving underneath it. He was watching her. Not the room, not the council assembling, not Morn seated in the corner with Roger Hardy at his shoulder. Her. She did not look at him directly. She was not ready to look at him directly. Roger had bound Morn's wrists with a discretion that managed to be both efficient and, she thought, quietly satisfying. Morn sat with his hands in his lap and his composure largely intact and said nothing. He had been saying nothing since the king's voice had ended the conversation. She understood this as strategy. A man who had spent years controlling information knew that silence in a collapsing situation was the last form of control available. She did not look at him either. She looked at Wren. Blair presented the evidence to the council with the same measured precision he had used in the king's sitting room. He laid the documents out in chronological order, walked them through 3 years of intelligence sales, named the Eastern Province contacts, showed them the correspondence in Morn's handwriting. He presented the Queen's letters last. The room changed when he read them aloud. She had expected anger, professional, political anger, the affronted fury of men whose institution had been betrayed. She had not expected what she saw instead on several faces, something rawer. The specific grief of men who had watched their king carry a loss for 6 months, who had stood at the funeral, who had found no words adequate to the magnitude of it. The look of people understanding that the magnitude had been manufactured. One of the older counselors, a broad man with white hair who had the bearing of someone who had been in military service since before the king was born, turned to look at Morn with an expression so controlled it was more frightening than rage. Morn looked at the floor. The king spoke once during the presentation, when Blair reached the part about the eastern border skirmishes. "How many men?" he asked quietly. Blair looked at the ledger. 31 confirmed deaths in the border engagements of last spring, he said. Based on the intelligence sold in the preceding months, the tactical disadvantage was 31, the king said. He did not say anything else. The number sat in the room. Morn said nothing. When Blair finished, the king looked at each counselor in turn. He was still holding Wren. He had not put her down since he had taken her, and she had settled against him with the comfortable confidence of something that had found its correct place. "I will hear your counsel," the king said, "after which I will make my decision." They counseled, briefly, for men who had just been handed the most significant political event of the past decade. They were unified, she noted, in a way that suggested Blair had chosen whom to summon with care. No waverers, no men with competing loyalties. When they finished, the king nodded once. "Lord Valdric Morn," he said, "is hereby charged with high treason, conspiracy to commit murder of the Queen and her heir, the illegal sale of military intelligence to foreign powers, and the willful manipulation of the crown for personal gain." His voice was level and absolute. "He will be held in the lower garrison pending full trial before the complete council." He looked at Roger. "See to it." Roger moved. Morn stood. He looked at the king. One long, final look. She tried to read it and couldn't. Not remorse, not defiance, something more complicated than either. The look of a man who had built a thing over years and was watching it come down and was perhaps, only now, calculating whether it had been worth it. The king did not look away. Morn was escorted out. The door closed. The room breathed. The council was dismissed with quiet efficiency. Blair stayed. Darren stayed. Roger returned after handing Morn to the garrison guard and took up his position near the door with the solid, undemonstrative reliability that seemed to be his essential quality. The king looked at Blair. "The Eastern Province contacts," he said. "I want every name." "I have them," Blair said. "The border commanders need to know by morning. The intelligence sold over the past 3 years needs to be assessed for ongoing vulnerability." He paused. "How long will that take?" "Weeks," Blair said honestly. "Months for the full picture." The king nodded. "Start tonight." He looked at Darren. "Your account in writing. Everything from the beginning. How long you suspected, what you observed, what you built. I want the complete record." "Tonight," Darren confirmed. "And the woman who died in the palace corridor," the king said. His voice changed slightly. "The midwife." "Odessa Shea," Blair said. "She saved my daughter's life." He paused. She has a husband? Darren looked up. Something moved in his face. She did, he said carefully. I don't know his current situation. Find him, the king said. Whatever she gave, he should know it, and the crown will see him provided for. He looked at Blair. See to it personally. Blair inclined his head. Yes, Your Majesty. She thought about Odessa Shea running through the palace corridor with a newborn tucked against her chest, running until she had nothing left, dying in a servant's passage with her arms frozen around the thing she was protecting. She thought about a husband somewhere in the city who had spent 6 months not knowing. She was glad the king was the kind of man who thought to ask. Blair and Darren left together, both with work that could not wait for morning. Darren paused in the doorway. He looked at Ella. He held the look for a moment, and she felt everything in it. The 4 days of roads and fires and orchards and canal paths and mill bridges, and everything that had accumulated in the spaces between the words they had said to each other. He had things to write down tonight. She had things to think about. They both knew it. Neither of them said it. Tomorrow, he said. It was not a question. It was the quietest, most certain thing she had heard him say. Tomorrow, she said. He left. Roger settled near the door and became, with impressive professionalism, entirely unobtrusive. The king looked at Ella. He had put Wren in the crook of his left arm. She was awake, working her fist against his collar with focused determination. Sit down, he said. Not a command, an invitation. She sat in the chair Morin had occupied. It was still warm. She moved past that thought and focused on the king's face. He looked at Wren for a moment before he spoke. She's been with you since the corridor. Yes. How old was she when you found her? 4 days, I think. She was very new. He closed his eyes briefly, opened them. She knows you. Yes. He was quiet, looking at the small face against his chest, the dark hair fine as smoke, the fist working at his collar now the way it had worked at Ella's, with the same focused, proprietary confidence. My wife chose that name, he said. Wren. She loved the winter birds. His voice was steady, and the grief ran under it like a river under ice, deep and permanent and no longer pretending to be anything else. She said they sang because they had to, not because conditions were favorable. He looked up. I think she would have liked you. Ella said nothing. She did not trust her voice for a moment. You could have kept walking, he said. 2 hours from the border. Everything you needed to disappear. I know. Why didn't you? She had answered this question once tonight already. The answer she had given then was true, but incomplete. She looked at Wren, at the small face against the king's chest, at the fist curled in his collar. Because she's not royal property, she said. She's a person. She deserved to know where she came from. She paused. And because the man who ordered my execution was standing 3 feet behind you, and he was smiling. The king looked at her steadily. When did you see that? The morning they put me in chains, she said. I was in the square. I had been caught 2 days after we turned back. She met his eyes. He was standing at your shoulder, and you were reading the decree, and he was watching me, and he was... She stopped. He was so certain. You could have spoken, the king said. You could have told me. With him standing next to you? She shook her head. He would have had me dead before the sentence finished, and Wren would have disappeared. She looked at her hands. So I stayed quiet, and I waited. You waited on your knees in the square, he said quietly. For what? She looked up. For you to look at me, she said simply, without him in the way. The king was still for a long moment. He looked at Wren. I have a great deal to answer for, he said. You were deceived, she said, by someone you had no reason to distrust. That is not the same as blameless. No, she agreed, it isn't. He looked at her with something she recognized, after a moment, as respect, the specific kind that arrived when someone said the honest thing instead of the comfortable one. What do you want? He asked. Name it, whatever is in my power to give. She had thought about this in Dorothy's spare room. She had thought about it on the road back to the city. She had known what she was going to say before he asked. "One thing," she said. "Let me keep her. Not as a servant, not as staff." She held his gaze. "As her mother. In whatever way that can be made to work alongside what she is and what she'll need to become." The king looked at her for a long time. "She already has a mother," he said. His voice was quiet. "She has had one since the corridor." He looked at Ren, at the small face, the dark hair, the fist still working at his collar. "I am a man asking to be her father. I think that's the honest position." Ella's throat tightened. "I think," she said carefully, "that can be made to work." The ghost of something moved across his face, not quite a smile, the shape that came before one, in a man who had forgotten for 6 months that the shape existed. "She will need to know the court," he said. "She will need tutors. She will need to understand what she is." "I know." "And she will need you," he said. "Whatever else she needs, she will need you." He looked at Ella with the directness she was coming to understand was simply how he was, underneath the grief and the portrait composure. "You are the person she knows. You are the warmth she orients toward. That is not a small thing." He paused. "That is, in fact, everything." Ren chose this moment to release his collar and reach toward Ella. Both of them looked at her, the small hand extended, the imperious confidence of someone who had never once been denied what she reached for. Ella leaned forward and gave her finger. The fist closed around it. The king watched this, and the almost smile completed itself. Outside, the palace was loud with the controlled urgency of a night that would be remembered. Boots in corridors, voices, the sound of an institution reorganizing itself around a truth it had been kept from for 6 months. In the sitting room by the low fire, it was quiet. Ren held Ella's finger and the king's collar simultaneously, entirely satisfied with this arrangement, and looked at the fire with her grave, considering expression. Chapter 10. What Remains. 3 things happened in the week after Morn was taken to the lower garrison. The first was that the king announced his daughter's existence to the kingdom. He did it himself, without intermediary, in the main courtyard of the palace with the full council present and the household staff assembled and the city gates open so that the people gathered outside could hear. He stood at the top of the courtyard steps, and he held Ren against his chest, and he spoke without notes for the first time anyone present could remember a king doing. He said his queen had not died in despair. He said she had died protecting something she loved with everything she had. He said the child he held was proof of that love and proof of her courage. He said her name, Ren, after the birds that sang because they had to, and something moved through the assembled crowd that she could hear from where she stood at the base of the steps. Not applause, something quieter and more permanent, the sound of people absorbing something real. He did not mention Ella by name. They had agreed on this. Her time for being invisible was not yet over, and she had learned to use invisibility well. The second thing was that Blair Holmes found Odessa Shea's husband. His name was Philip Bentley, and he had spent 6 months believing his wife had panicked and fled after the Queen's death and chosen not to come back to him. 6 months of not knowing, which Ella understood from the set of Blair's face when he reported it, was its own particular cruelty. Blair told him everything. She was not present for this, but Blair told her afterward that Philip had sat very still for a long time, and then he had said simply, "She would have done exactly that. That is exactly who she was." The king provided for him as promised. Philip Bentley remained in the city. She saw him once, from a distance, a quiet man with the specific bearing of someone carrying grief with intention rather than resignation. She did not approach him. She did not know what she would say, but she was glad he knew. The third thing was that Darren submitted his written account to the king and then came to find her. She was in the small courtyard garden off the east wing, which was dormant and bare and not yet the place it would become in spring, but which had the quality she needed most at that particular moment. It was outside, and quiet, and no one else was using it. Ren was in a sling against her chest, asleep for once without needing to be convinced. The week had been loud and complicated and full of strangers' faces, and she suspected Wren had found it as exhausting as she had, which was why she was sleeping deeply in the cold garden air with the perfect abandon of someone who had decided the world could wait. She heard Darren's footsteps before she saw him. She had learned his walk, unhurried even, the particular cadence of someone who moved through spaces without apologizing for his presence. He came around the dormant rosebush and stopped a few feet away. He looked different without the urgency, without the road and the checkpoints and the constant low-level calculation of the previous week. The river water calm was still there, but it sat differently now. Not the stillness of a man managing a situation, but the stillness of a man who had put something down that he had been carrying for a long time. "Your account," she said. "The king read it?" "Last night," he said. "All of it." "And?" "He reinstated my commission." A pause. "And then he asked me what I wanted to do with it." She looked at him. "What did you say?" "I said I wanted to think about it." He looked at Wren. "That I had some things to work out first." She waited. He came and sat on the garden wall, not close, not far, the same distance he had maintained on the mill bridge, respectful, deliberate, a distance that was a question rather than an assumption. "You're staying," he said, not a question. "Yes." "In the palace." "In whatever arrangement the king and I have worked out," she said, "which is not exactly a palace position and not exactly not one." She paused. "I'm her mother. That doesn't have a formal title." "No," he agreed. The dormant garden was very quiet. Somewhere above them a window opened and closed. "I owe you an honest thing," he said. She looked at him. "In the market," he said. "When I found you the first time and let you walk, I told you it was because of how you held her." He met her eyes. "That was true. It was not the whole truth." She waited. "I had been watching you for 11 minutes, he said, "and in 11 minutes I had already—" He stopped, reorganized. "I had already decided that whatever you were running from, it was not going to catch you while I was the one sent to catch it." She held his gaze. "That is not a professional position," he said. "No," she agreed. "It was not a rational decision." "Most of the decisions from that week weren't," she said. The corner of his mouth moved, the shape of something she had been waiting, without fully knowing she was waiting, to see. "I don't have a plan," he said. "I want to be honest about that. I have a reinstated commission I haven't decided what to do with, and I am sitting on a wall in a dormant garden telling a woman I have known for 6 days that I—" He stopped again. "Darren," she said. He looked at her. "You walked back into a city where your name was on the wanted posters," she said. "To help a woman you had no professional obligation to help. You gave up 3 years of carefully built position, and you did it without hesitating." She looked at him steadily. "I don't need a plan. I need someone who does what they believe is right before the argument finishes." He was quiet for a moment. "That's a very specific requirement," he said. "I know where it comes from," she said. He looked at Wren, at the small, sleeping face, the dark hair, the fist curled under her chin. "She's going to be extraordinary," he said. "She already is," Ella said. He looked up from Wren to her face, and the look was the same one she had seen in the king's sitting room, the one she had described to herself then as a man who had stopped trying not to see something. But closer now, and more certain, and without the reservation of a man still calculating his position. He reached across the distance between them and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, with the same care he had used with the farm dogs and with Tim at the ford, the complete, unhurried attention of someone who was not in a hurry because they intended to be present for a long time. She held his gaze. "Stay," she said, simply, the way she had made every decision since the palace corridor, before the argument finished, at the point where the right thing became undeniable. He nodded once. "I'll tell the king tomorrow," he said. The trial of Valdric Morn lasted 11 days. Ella did not attend. She had given her account to Blair in writing, every detail from the corridor to the sitting room, and Blair presented it as testimony with the same precision he brought to everything. She did not need to be in the room for it. She had already said what she needed to say in that room, on that night, with Morn's composure stripping away layer by layer until what was underneath it was finally visible to the people who needed to see it. The verdict was unanimous. She heard about it from Darren, who had attended as a witness, who came back to the East Wing courtyard where she was teaching Wren to notice birdsong, holding her up toward the bare branches where a small bird was conducting an energetic monologue, saying, "Bird! That's a bird, listen!" and stood watching them for a moment before he told her. "It's done," he said. She lowered Wren and looked at him. "Guilty on all charges," he said. "The king will announce sentencing tomorrow." She nodded. She looked at the bare branch where the small bird had been. It had gone while she wasn't watching, leaving the branch empty and the air quiet. "Is it enough?" he asked. He was asking something more specific than the verdict. She thought about the palace corridor, the blood, the two women on the floor, the small sound that had reached her through a closed door. She thought about Odessa Shea's frozen hands. She thought about 31 soldiers dead in a border engagement because someone had sold the route they were walking. "No," she said honestly, "it's not enough for what he did." She looked at Wren. "But it's what justice looks like, and Wren will grow up in a kingdom where it happened." She paused. "That's worth something." Darren looked at her with the settled, decided look she had come to recognize as his version of feeling something he didn't have words for. He took her free hand, not dramatically, the way you took something you intended to keep. She let him. Epilogue. Small birds that sing through winter. 6 months later. The East Courtyard garden was not dormant anymore. It had become, in the way of things tended with consistent attention, something genuinely worth sitting in. Climbing roses on the south wall, not yet blooming but greening steadily. A small herb bed that Ella had put in herself, partly from habit and partly because she was not the kind of person who could live somewhere for 6 months and not grow something useful in it. Wren was walking, not gracefully, with the specific lurching confidence of someone who had decided walking was happening, regardless of whether her legs had fully agreed to the terms. She moved through the garden from one fixed point to the next, the bench, the herb bed, Ella's knee, Darren's boot, using each as a staging post for the next assault, her expression one of total serious concentration, punctuated by the occasional delighted surprise of finding that the floor was still there. The king visited on Tuesdays. This had become, without formal arrangement, simply how it was. He came in the late afternoon, usually with Roger at his shoulder, sometimes with Blair, and he sat in the garden and held his daughter and talked to Ella about things that had nothing to do with the kingdom, about the queen mostly, carefully, at whatever depth felt right that particular week. He was learning to be a father to someone who already had a mother. He was doing it with a grace that she had hoped for and not entirely expected. He had offered her a title 4 times. She had declined 4 times. On the 5th offer, she had said, with a directness she suspected he appreciated, "I am Wren's mother. That is the only title that matters. Everything else is administration." He had laughed. A real one, she thought. The first she had heard from him. It had changed his face entirely. Philip Bentley came occasionally. He had become, quietly and without fanfare, a presence in the periphery of their lives. A man who had no claim on Wren and made none, but who had been loved by the woman who saved her and therefore occupied a particular place that had no formal name, but was real. He brought small things sometimes. Flowers from a market stall. Once, a carved wooden bird he had made himself, smooth and small and precise, which Wren immediately put in her mouth, and which Ella quietly rescued and put on the windowsill where it still sat. He never stayed long, but he always looked at Wren before he left, with an expression she recognized, the expression of someone finding something bearable that had previously seemed unbearable. It helped him to see her. She understood that. She was glad she could offer it. On a Tuesday in late spring, the king arrived with his 3 nephews. Aaron's children, he had explained, needed to meet their cousin. They were 6, 8, and 10, loud and curious and entirely unimpressed by palace protocol, and they arrived in the East Courtyard Garden like a small weather event. Wren found them extraordinary. She stood in the middle of the garden and watched them with her grave, systematic expression for approximately 45 seconds. Then she made her decision and lurched toward the youngest one with her arms out and her whole body committed to the trajectory. He caught her, startled, looked at her face, looked at his father. "Is she always like this?" he asked. "Always," Ella said. He looked back at Wren, who was now investigating his collar with focused intent. "I like her," he announced. The garden filled with noise and small running feet, and Ella sat on the bench with Darren beside her and watched the king trying to have a conversation while his daughter repeatedly redirected his attention by the simple method of grabbing his finger and pulling, and she felt the thing she had felt at the end of the worst night of her life, kneeling in the snow outside the palace, with a wanted notice on every wall and a newborn against her chest, and no plan. Not hope, exactly. Something more specific than hope. The certainty that whatever came next, she was not facing it alone. Darren's hand found hers on the bench between them. He didn't look at her when he did it. He was watching the garden, the children, the king's expression when Wren grabbed his finger again and held on with both fists, her face arranged in the look of someone making a permanent claim. "She does that to everyone she decides about," Ella said. "I know," he said. "She did it to me on the first day, the mill bridge." Ella looked at him. "She was asleep on the mill bridge." "I know," he said. "She did it anyway." She looked at him for a moment, the river water eyes, the controlled face, the corner of the mouth that moved when something pleased him. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He tightened his hand around hers. That evening, after the king had gone and the garden was quiet and Wren was asleep in the next room, with the carved wooden bird on the windowsill above her and the spring light going gold through the frosted glass, Ella stood in the doorway and listened, the small chest rising and falling, the even breath of someone sleeping without weight, without knowledge of how close the odds had been, without anything between her and the world except the people who had chosen her. She thought about a palace corridor and a wrong turn, and a sound too thin to be certain of. She thought about the choice she had not made, the one that would have been sensible, safe, survivable, the one she had taken one step toward and then abandoned without finishing the argument. She thought, if I had taken that step. She could not hold the thought. It had no shape she could make herself look at directly. She looked at Wren instead. Dark hair, fine as smoke, spread on the pillow, the small crease between the brows, smooth in sleep, both fists curled under her chin, holding nothing, in the specific grip of someone who had decided the world owed it an answer and intended to keep reaching until the answer arrived. "You're not all right," she had said on the first night, "but I've got you now." She pressed her hand flat against the doorframe, steady, real. Outside, a small bird was singing in the courtyard garden, clear and unhurried, entirely unconcerned with whether conditions were favorable. It sang because it had to. She listened until it finished. Then she went inside and closed the door and let the evening be what it was. Enough. Everything. Thank you so much for listening. If this story stayed with you, if you found yourself unable to stop, if you felt Ella and Wren and Darren like people you actually knew, then it did what it was made to do. New stories come regularly.